Howdy peeps, hope you're doing well. So in this video I'm kind of gonna pick this one apart, as has been suggested previously, as to what I do to people when they have an opinion opinions such as these. Yeah, it's funny how the perspective of what you're doing changes if someone that might not particularly not like you as a person, but might have a bit of an issue with your side of the whole gender thing, right? Yeah, it's funny how that changes from being what I would, and maybe I'm being biased, I don't know, maybe it is that. But it's funny how it can go from, well, you're actually trying to put a valid point out there, but when it doesn't go with the flow of the narrative, all of a sudden, you're not actually providing any difference of opinion, you just don't like women. That generally tends to be the way things go, especially on platforms like YouTube. Sometimes just because that is what the other person might actually think. Other times it's just because they're out to destroy you because they don't like the opposite gender. And everything's men's fault. And this is where we're at. Anyway, this video, what I'm talking about today, is an old video by a content creator by the name of Rachel Oates. And this is a very long video, and I won't lie, I have tried many times to do this in segments. It got to the point where it was going to become a mini-series, and then I realised it was going to be the length of like Game of Thrones or something like that, because there's just so much mental gymnastics that goes on in this that you need to do. So when this all became a thing, needless to say, I was one of them guys that I'm like, you know, it's not all men, right? Because it ain't. And it's that thing of like people that put out concepts like that, suggesting that men as a generalisation need to be educated on how to treat women in this case, which, look, let's not beat about the bush, that is exactly what it's about. And that wasn't a Freudian slip, and nor was there any kind of pun intended with that one. But I'll skip to about 1:29, and I'm going to see how I can do this video, and I'm going to give another sort of perspective, because as a content creator, one of the things that I can't, or we can't quite do unless you're actually live streaming it, is actually have an interaction. Now, if you're trying to push a narrative, it's very convenient, you know, because you get to say what you want to say, you can voice your opinion, your thoughts on a matter, and short of people in the comments section maybe putting up an argument or agreeing with you, whichever the case may be, short of that, you don't really get a great deal of interaction. So I see it as somewhat like it's not, well, I suppose it kind of is unfair, but it isn't. Anyway, let's crack on with this one. So this is why she's obviously got the ump with the problem with hashtag not all men.
Just for ease in this video, I'm just mostly going to be saying men and women to save a bit of time. It's also worth mentioning before we jump into the meat of this video that I am coming at this from a very UK-centric point of view, because that is my personal experience, that is what I'm knowledgeable in, that's what I've lived through, that's what I know about.
Okay, and that's fair enough. We're all allowed to tell our side of the story, what we've experienced, what we've been through, and our perspective. Obviously, as a UK content creator, I pretty much do the same. It would be pointless me talking about some town out in America that I know very little about. It would be, you know, it would be a fallacy, right? And I wouldn't want to do that, but let's carry on.
However, different people in different countries and cultures will have very different experiences to me. My experience isn't the only one, and other people's experiences are just as valid and important, and you shouldn't discount someone's experiences just because it's different from your own.
Okay. So, with that said, everyone's experience is valid, and just because it's different to your own doesn't make it any less important, right?
Talk about women being victims of violence, assault, harassment, anything, especially on the street, especially in public, especially at night. It's not just happening in the UK, it's not just happening in the US, it happens everywhere. And some places will be more dangerous than others, some people will experience it differently to others, and it's important to bear that in mind before you go making sweeping statements about, well, women do this, or...
The sweeping statements of women do this and women do that. But what are you doing in your actual video? You know, you're making these, air quotes, sweeping statements about men and what they supposedly do, according to your narrative in this instance. Now, do you see why that in itself is unfair?
Women do this, or men do it. You know what I mean. Today, mostly, I want to talk about violence and harassment against women that happens in public, on the streets, mostly at night, but not always. Hundreds, thousands of women every year are harassed, assaulted, raped, murdered by literal strangers. And while it's easy to say that, well, most rapes happen by someone you know, not all of them do. And it is a massive issue with the ones that do occur by strangers. And it's not just full-on rape or full-on murder that's the issue. It's people being touched inappropriately. It's people being assaulted. It's people being catcalled. It's people being made to feel scared and uncomfortable in what should be their own space.
Okay, now, I'm going to bring up a valid point, because that is a valid point, right? That is a valid point. People should not have to feel scared while they're going out at night and all of this. But realistically speaking, these days, do you have any idea, to put the shit on the other foot, and I know you're not going to, she probably won't like the fact that I'm doing this, because I am playing devil's advocate on this one. But the amount of guys that have actually opted out of dating and meeting women and being courteous to women because of the amount of times that an untruth has been told. Do you have any idea of the amount of guys? Now look, it's not the largest percentage in the world, but it's enough. And more often than not, it happens to what we refer to as the good guys or the nice guys. You know, these situations don't seem to apply to the Chads and the Tyrones of the world. It only seems to be happening to the good guys. And that's not to say that literally every single of these guys have never put a foot wrong and they've never done anything bad. I'm sure, you know, we're all human. Let's just be real about this for a second. We're all human. We all screw up from time to time, right? It's just human nature. The important part is obviously learning from that and moving forward. I believe something that they call progressiveness. That is more of an individual progressive thing, but let's just carry on.
Despite how people like to pull out lines like, but some crimes are committed by women, like, that's not what's relevant to this particular conversation.
But you see, it comes down to that thing though, doesn't it? Whereas it is relevant to that conversation, because it's like you're splitting up the two things here, the whole male and female, and whether you're aware of it, but psychologically, you're not I wouldn't say you're intentionally out of malevolence. You're not malevolently just tarring all the guys with the same brush, you know, that sweeping broad brush that you spoke about earlier. But realistically speaking, you are still dividing it up, and as soon as men hear the word, oh, men need to change that the way that they do this, men start listening and men start paying attention. And so when you've been in that situation of you might have been accused of doing something that you didn't do, and that could be any number of things in this kind of a situation, and it didn't happen, and then you don't get listened to based on your genitalia or your gender, yeah, the problem expands. And it's not that, as you said earlier, it's not muddying the water, it is bringing a valid point. And what you got to understand a lot of the time is when someone brings up that point, it's like, well, obviously we've got this actual whole problem with society, because you're saying it's just the guys. They're not necessarily saying it's just the women. But either way, it's pointing out one thing that never really gets addressed, and that is the problem is with our society. Or is it? I mean, let's carry on.
You're muddying the waters. No one is saying women don't commit crimes. What we are saying is, if you look...
is don't talk about them. Because we're talking about men who commit crimes. So don't talk about the women that do it. Do you know what I mean? It shuts down the argument immediately, and it shows that you're not open to a debate or a debacle with, or a dialogue, dialect, whatever, with someone that has actually got, you know, that they are in line with the same sort of thing with what's going on, but it just shows that you're not willing to listen to their part as well, because they're recognising that there's a problem with our society. Now, on a side note, for some unbeknown reason to me and many other rational thinkers, we're still trying to figure out why we're seeing in our video feeds more often than not teachers, often preschool teachers, getting in trouble with parents because they are dressing their children up in clothes that they wouldn't normally wear. Can we put it that way? Not even their kids, they can get away with doing it, it seems. Now, admittedly, this has happened in America. I'm not too sure about the UK. Needless to say, yeah, let's look at the problem that we've got with our society. And, you know, you sort of mentioned earlier about not talking about the other scope of humans that walk this earth amongst us, such as, well, even the whole human thing is debatable now. You identify as a toaster or something, do you know what I mean? But, you know, realistically, it's like, when, I mean, look at it from a sports perspective. When we get guys that go over, they want to identify as women all of a sudden, you know, you'll notice how the guys just suddenly start winning all the awards. I think they're making a very good point, visual point at least, that men and women are not equal in that kind of a sense either, you know, in terms of physical strength. But that is going off of the topic, and I want to carry on with this one.
At the statistics, and I'll leave a link to the UK Gov's to this particular conversation. You're muddying the waters. No one is saying women don't commit crimes. What we are saying is, if you look at the statistics, and I'll leave a link to the UK Gov's stats website below so you can go and check out whatever you want, violent and sexual crimes are overwhelmingly committed by men. And I don't just mean it's like a 51 to 49% split. I mean overwhelmingly committed by men. And then when we consider murders, rapes, violent attacks and sexual harassment against women in public perpetrated by strangers, almost every case there is committed by a man. I mean, sure, all kinds of people commit...
I want to stop right there, because this is something that, as a content creator that probably buried himself under the algorithm single-handedly by talking about things that went against the narrative. So I remember a couple of years ago, I think it was back in 2017 or 2018, when it all came to light that there was such a thing as grooming gangs that had been in operation up and down the UK probably for the last 40 years. Okay, for the last 40 years. Now, needless to say, a lot of the cases prior to that case, and look, there was a whole ton of outrage at the time because there was a certain individual that was going around and he was doing things like he was actually being a reporter, to be fair, but he was standing outside the courthouse. He got in all sorts of trouble with the law. There was protests about his incarceration and all of this. And look, think of it what you will, right? I get at this point it's just easy to just point the finger and say, oh well, this guy is this because reasons. And it's like, no, that is a guy that's actually trying to point something out. Maybe he has a point. Maybe he should be listened to, rather than just ridiculed and shamed and all of that. You know, as the saying goes, when you cut out a man's tongue, it's because it's the only way, you know, it's a metaphor, of course, it's the only way of stopping them from telling the truth. Which kind of, you know, is a thing, really, isn't it? I mean, we're seeing it, to bring things up a bit up to date and to just delve off of that ever so quickly recently. since Elon Musk bought Twitter, you'll notice that the governments of the world have started pooping their pants because all of a sudden free speech is going to be a thing. And they can't have that. They can't push their narrative if people have freedom of speech or a different of opinion and they're allowed to voice that opinion. It's what they call the dissenters of the world. Anyhow, sharing their misinformation. Yeah, funny that. It's also funny who is the arbiter of actual real information and misinformation. Funny how that works. Not a coincidence. Anyway, digressing back, so this particular individual that was talking about all these court cases were things that have been going on for the last 40 years that we kind of know of in the air quotes on the underworld, of the darker side of the United Kingdom. And there was lots of men who'd have thunk it. There was lots of men who were operating in these circles and doing very bad things to generally young white girls and young Indian girls. The authorities knew that this had been going on for years. The police knew it had been going on for years. Everyone knew. Everyone knew. But no one could really do anything about it because of the backlash. So I'd be interested to see, and it might actually be worth me looking afterwards to see what this demographic is. Because to simply tar that brush of all men, I mean, and again, these are these are valid points, because these groups are not a representation of all men. The actions of a few are not the representations of all men. And I get that you probably won't like me saying that, but guess what? I don't care that you don't like people saying that. It's true, it's a fact. But I need to carry on with the video with this
all
one.
Kinds of crimes, but honestly, the chance of a random woman on the street being attacked or harassed by a random man on the street is so disgustingly high that it's no wonder so many of us are terrified to go out alone. What?
Then there's that. I'll just carry on.
Kind of recently kickstarted this conversation in the UK is the absolutely heartbreaking case of Sarah Everard, which hits a little too close to home for me because she was a young woman, similar age to me, living in London, who just happened to be walking home alone one night, and a week later her remains were found in a woodland in Kent. And it's heartbreaking, it's terrifying, because she could have been absolutely any one of us. I know I live in Leeds now and not London, but I was there for 4 years, so...
And in them 4 years, how many times did that happen to you? Right. Speaking of the areas where these things were going on, digressing back to these gangs, circles that were running up and down the country, do you realise that Manchester, Leeds, London, Rotherham, Rochdale, that they were all part of it, right? But yet you've never fallen prey to that. Or maybe you never go out, so maybe it won't ever happen. But if in the 4 years that you were at university in London, that didn't happen to you, is it still that safe to say that it's disproportionately high? And again, have you also looked into perhaps the demographics? Maybe that is a thing. Relating back to another video that I covered, I believe in 2017, where there was this whole thing of a lot of European countries wanting to bring in people from third world countries that did not, or do not, should I say, share the same culture, should we say. And the way they do things is very different to the way most European countries do things. That whole respect and don't touch wasn't sort of a thing for them, or isn't sort of a thing for them. And shock horror, a lot of them have probably not got a great deal of intention of changing their culture just because they've come to another country, right? Regardless of where that country is. So when this festival in Germany happened, needless to say that there were lots of girls reporting to the cops, as they rightly should, right? Reporting these crimes to the cops, that these things have been going on. Basically, there was an influx of these guys that had come in from another country which didn't share the same cultural beliefs or the same cultural expressions or whatever, and they just behaved like how they wanted to. And as a result of that, all these young girls were literally harassed. And it was physical a lot of the time. It wasn't just a bit of catcalling here and there, you know. But here we are, you know. And is that being taken into consideration with the demographic? Is that something that the government could even put up without it being some sort of ist or ism with a ray in front of it? Do you know what I mean? Let's carry on.
You know, these things still, they can happen anywhere. The thing is, she did everything she was supposed to do. She wore the sensible shoes. She called her boyfriend. She walked in brightly lit areas, and she still ended up dead. I don't want to focus too much on this one particular case because, one, it's still very fresh, and honestly, I don't want people sitting here fighting over details of her case, trying to rip it apart when the family's still grieving. And I don't think it's fair to tear apart one particular tragedy looking for faults, because she doesn't deserve that, her family doesn't deserve that. And
no, but you see, with respect, this is exactly why you have to look at things with faults. Now, this is just a mere example, and I'm not suggesting that it could have been what was going on in that situation with Sarah Everard, a video topic that I covered myself. Admittedly, I don't know a great deal of sort of background behind it. Now, to think that someone that was high up in the police force would actually just go and do that to a random woman, I do think it's a little bit odd. Like I said, I probably could benefit from investigating that further to find out more about it. But you've also got to be real. It's in one aspect where it's like, well, you know, you want to respect the feelings of the family, and this was over a year ago now. It's also a dead in the water, don't argue with me because you'll hurt someone's feelings. Right? That is also how that can be seen. But realistically speaking, when you look at, you know, just to see things from a different perspective, when you take things like dating apps, and I talk a lot about it, and there's a relevance to this, there's a lot of guys and a lot of women on there that are already married, and their partners don't know that they're on these dating apps, looking for a bit of lust, a bit of weekend fun, right? That's not to say that some men, or women for that matter, if they were to find out that their partner was doing that and they was on these apps and all of this, and again, you don't know, you don't, this is just an example of something that does happen, and how it can then be seen as you know, you seem to get away with using all the words without it demonetising or messing about with your algorithm. I don't know, maybe you get away with it because it's a female thing, I don't know. But either way, you know, if it's, and I'm not justifying the actions of anyone that actually goes and takes someone's life because they you know, they were promiscuous in their relationship or something like that, right? I can't defend that anyway, and nor would I. But you see where that's going. You know, the woman gets that the other ass being cheating or something, so maybe she'll batter him. And the guy, you know, realistically speaking, probably isn't going to file a lawsuit or anything like that on the basis that he got beat up, because he was in the wrong in the first place. And it's not exactly societally that acceptable to admit, at least amongst your social peers, your friends and co-workers and all of that. It's not exactly a good thing to say, oh yeah, I'll go home to the missus and she beats me up. It's not going to do anything for your social status, you know what I mean? It's going to do the opposite. They're going to be thinking, why are you letting her beat you up? You know, what are we doing? The first question I would pose is, why are you still with her? But in some instances it does go to these lengths, and this works on both sides, you know. But I get it, you're pushing a narrative that it's just men.
And I think anyone who looks for reasons why she might have deserved it, or anything disgusting like that, they're just...
And again, it's not that I'm looking for a reason as to why anyone would deserve something like that. I don't think anyone deserves something like that. On the flip side, you do have to investigate everything that led up to that moment as to when that happened. Was it a complete stranger? You know, there's very easy ways of having affairs in this day and age with the technology available to us. You know, you've got apps on your phone which you can send photos and messages, and they delete themselves after the first couple of minutes, never to be found again. Just saying. I can't think of a better way of, if I wanted to cheat on a partner. There you go. You just upload one of these apps, and you can just message and send pictures to each other to your heart's content. And you won't get caught because there's no trail of evidence. Again, it comes down to that thing of, no, I can't justify the actions of that guy against Ever Everard. No, I can't. Absolutely. Why would I? At the same, it's like you also need to look at all the evidence in front of you to build a picture of how it happened, why it happened. That is the only way you really get any justice. Otherwise, you just get this tied with a broad brush, right?
Awful human beings, and that's why I don't want to focus too much on one particular case, because while that's what sparked this conversation, it's long overdue, because it's by no means a one-off case. It's one example of it, but this has happened to countless other women, and while not every woman has ended up dead, many have ended up hurt or terrified or physically or emotionally scarred. There's just...
And do you know what I love about this case that's going on between Amber and Johnny? Is that it's pointing out another side of the story. And you can make what you want with that, but you can't take away the truth. Now, you could argue in that instance, all right, well, they're maybe both as bad as each other. And so, well, they probably weren't to begin with. You can get a placid guy, and eventually, if you push enough of his buttons, he's going to flip, he's going to do something, he's going to say something, because he doesn't want to be treated that way. But with that, what does that come down to? False accusations and false allegations and a defamation of character. And I think this is a side of it that, when situations like this occur, you really need to take a step back and think of things from a different perspective. And I'm really struggling to see how long I've spent on this video. I'm going to wrap this one up now. This is probably going to be a mini-series at this rate, so thank you all for watching. Thoughts, comments and opinions, feel free to jot them down, and make sure you hit the subscribe and the bell icon so you know when part 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8 and 10 are coming out to this one. I know I missed number 9, but it's like, well, Anyway, till the next one, gents, stay cool, stay free, and peace out.